group would find useful as well, is raise public understanding that these birds are a threat to our wildlife and they're not just a backyard nuisance. So we have a big campaign here, or we had a big campaign here at the start, a public awareness campaign, and that meant that the Canberra community is really quite switched on that these birds are bad news. The other thing to tackle the problem is to reduce the feeding opportunity. So we say to people, keep your pet food inside. When people go to work, they put their dog food outside, they come home, the dog food's gone, they reckon Fido's had a lovely food. Well, it's the Indian Mynas. Better control waste in the public areas like schools, the skips at the back of shopping centres and restaurants. They need to have their lids down during the day, because not just Mynas but other sort of birds will be in there getting stuff. And while people like to associate with birds, in residential areas, and particularly in old folks' homes and places like that, people have a tendency to direct feed birds, you know, throw bread and seed out. Well, what we try to do is advise people in residential care not to direct feed Mynas, not to direct feed birds when Indian Mynas are around. So be a bit careful about that. Now, to reduce their nesting opportunities, people need to block up the cavities in their roofs, because they'll very easily find a niche under your tiles and get into your roof. And if people got nesting boxes, they need to maintain close watch on those, because they'll take those over in a jiffy. And to reduce the roosting opportunities, it's good if people remove unsuitable shrubs and trees. Like I said before, those pencil pines and conifers, which have a heavily dense foliage. And a plea to plant suitable gardens. But these are birds of woodlands and open areas. So gardens that are heavily vegetated, no lawns, etc., and just all plants, the Mynas won't come in. So my yard is totally native and thick native shrubs and plants, and Mynas don't come in here. Now, the way to tackle the problem, we do it by backyard trapping. It's proven to be highly effective. We've given out something like 2,660 traps now over the 14 years that we've been working, and it's had a positive local impact in people's backyards in the immediate area. We have a protocol on animal welfare, which was originally worked up with the RSPCA, and that ensures that people know and put animal welfare issues to the fore. So the birds need to have food and water and shade while they're trapped. Because really, to get the public on side, we need to be able to demonstrate that people are responsible in the way they treat these animals. The government, local government, Landcare, the ACT government, RSPCA would get offside very quickly if they thought that people in a community group were being well, poorly treating these birds while they've been trapped. Up here, we've been involved in research, funding PhD projects or providing support to PhD research projects. And doing some monitoring for Mynas scan, which has basically dropped off now. It's a CRC for invasive animals, but the federal government stopped funding that a couple of years ago. Well, this coalition government did, so I'm surprised. Well, the big question that people want to know is that it's all very well talking about the problem of Mynas and doing trapping, but can we have an impact? Well, the positive impact is that when people have been backyard trapping, the trappers immediately report the small birds are back in their gardens, and that's the delight. The rosellas and galahs and kookaburras even are back in nesting hollows and nesting boxes. There's no mess, there's no fouling of patios. There's peace. But the real clincher for us is the Canberra Ornithologist Group Garden Bird Survey. Now, when we started in 2006 as a group, Indian Mynas were the 3rd most common bird. You can see it there. Back here in the 80s to come here. So we started here, they were the 3rd most common bird in Canberra. Now, the last survey period showed that they're now down to the 20th most common bird. So in those 14 years, we initially a huge drop and then slowed down and now back to the 20th. So we've asked people to supply us or to tell us their monthly captures. We have a database that records people's returns. And over the 14 years, we've had something like, well, not everybody reports. And this is one of the things you'll notice with volunteer groups, that a lot of people just want to trap these birds and get rid of them away from their backyards and not be involved in reporting and stuff like that. But of those who have reported, we now have records of over 73,000 birds been taken out. Now that number could be 85, 90,000, because I'm constantly getting coming across people who said they've got a trap that their mate gave it to them. We don't know them, they never reported, but they've caught 20, 30 birds. So that number could be very much higher. Well, the international activities really again shows that activity on Myna control can really be positive. In the Seychelles, this magpie robin had been down to 14 birds. In that they had a program to get rid of Indian Mynas, and in a couple of years it was up to 90 birds. There were still cats, there were still rats, but they got rid of the Mynas. In the Paradise flycatcher, the same sort of story, down to 60 birds, now up to 270. The Seychelles warbler, again the same story. Mynas had dropped this down to very low numbers and now up to 350. Tahiti, the monarch flycatcher, it was down to 19 birds in 3 small valleys. A lady called Silvana Saavedra, who comes from the Canary Islands off Africa, was engaged to trap and shoot the Mynas in these 3 valleys. And in the very first year, she trapped, or sorry, in 18 months, she trapped just over 3,000 Indian Mynas and over 1,500 of those red-vented bulbuls. Now, both of those were preying on the monarch flycatcher. And so once she got rid of those, the numbers of the monarch flycatcher again rebounded. And again, in the resorts, once they started trapping in the resorts, they made a big difference. We had one of our guys from our committee go over to a resort in Fiji. They had a problem where they'd have a couple thousand Mynas roosting in their dining room because the dining room's just open, no walls in it. So these birds were roosting there overnight and just fouling all the tables and whatever. So one of our guys went over there for a week and he trapped 800 Mynas in 1 week. And what he found was really the attraction of Mynas coming into the trap was hot chips, because and that was the one for them. Oops, what's going on here? Cook Island again, they've reduced Mynas or got rid of Mynas in the Cook Island Tui, and that's been good news for the lorikeet and the kingfisher. Well, managing the trap, a couple of things. Have it in a quiet spot in the garden. So a good spot is in the veggie patch in the back corner where people don't go too often. It's under the power lines and stuff like that. Where Mynas feed. We use dry dog food, pedigree for small adult dogs. People shouldn't skimp on what they put in their trap. No bread, no seed, otherwise you'll get rosellas. Don't put it on roofs or on tables because these are ground feeders and it's a bit awkward to get on top of a roof anyway. But try it on the ground, that's the way to do it. Keep cats away. Cats are a real no-no. Just the smell of cat around the trap is enough to put the miners coming down. And here we have an agreement with the ACT government that we'd only use it on private property and away from public view. And the reason for that is that there are some, we only operate because of the public support. So if there are sensitive people that see trapped miners or see miners trapped, they can be distressed, and then that causes a bit of problem. Also, if you're in public areas, there's a risk of people tripping over the trap, and then you've got a public liability issue, but also a vandalism as well. So keep it on private property. And an important thing, as we've got in our trapping help sheets, is don't approach the trap during daytime, because if there's a miner in the trap, because the miner in the trap could give an alarm call until other free-flying miners that you and the trap are bad news. So when it comes to restocking your food and removing or disposing of the trapped birds, do it after dusk. Now, I previously had a slide on the various traps, which I know is not on here, but the trap we use is one that we designed, and it's called the PG trap. It's in it's got two chambers, a feeding chamber, which has got two little tunnels, and the tunnel narrows in and slopes down. And because you're using dry dog food with it, not seed or not bread, you only get miners and starlings. The tunnels are too narrow for magpies or currawongs, and so you discriminate for other native birds. So it's very good for that. I'm sorry I don't have that other slide, because there's a few stories about the usefulness of some of these traps. Anyway, not everything or everybody reckons miners are bad news. This collared sparrowhawk, here's a miner the trap we have here. This collared sparrowhawk reckons miners make a nice little snack. In fact, on that point, for the last couple of years, the ACT Department of Environment is wanting to keep track of little eagles. There's a very small population of little eagles in the ACT, nine birds. And so what they got us to do is to put our traps out so that the little eagle would be attracted to the trap, and then they capture these little eagles. And they put radio transmitter on their backs or their legs or whatnot, and let them go to see where they were flying to and what issues there were in terms of new housing developments in the ACT. Well, one of these little eagles, which was captured by the cooperation of these Indian miners, flew first up to far north Queensland, then over to Port Pirie, then down to Melbourne, and then back up to Canberra. So that's a huge distance, but it just goes to show that there's a lot we don't know about our native birds. Anyway, I might leave it there. So basically, the take-home message is that it's our choice. We can have Indian miners, or we can have our native wildlife. I'll leave it there, Claire.
Wow, thank you, Bill. That was just very, in capturing so succinctly just what the issue is with Indian miners and where to go from here. Sally, do you want to lead the question and answer? Can I would you like to do that? We've got quite a few questions in the chat, and I have a few questions, so, and I'm sure other people do. I think we have asked that people put their questions in the chat so that we can just sort of, rather than everyone trying to speak at once, but maybe once we've gone, is that okay, Sally?
She's gone home.
Yeah, I think she's frozen. Okay, maybe while Sally, keep going with your unmute.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
If I could just start with one question, and I'm just getting onto the chat now, but my question is, I believe that in Victoria, the Indian myna is not a prescribed pest. Is that the case in Canberra?
Well,
I believe the Victorian state government do anything about mynas because they're not considered a pest.
Indian mynas aren't formally recognised as a pest anywhere in Australia. We made a submission to the ACT government 4 years ago for Indian mynas to be a prescribed bird in the ACT, and that triggered them to look at a whole range of what other weeds, animals, fish should be considered a designated pest animal or plant in the ACT. So that's taken them about 3 years to compile this huge list, and the draft report indicates that they will list the Indian myna as a designated pest animal in the ACT. So that will be the first time any jurisdiction in Australia has formally taken that step. Now, in Victoria, unfortunately, the way that the law regarding designation and prescription of pest animals operates is that the animal has to be a threat, a recognised threat to, I think, 3 endangered animals. And clearly, it's very difficult to prove that. They have declared in Victoria the noisy myna, the one I showed before, which is the grey honeyeater. And that's because it was identified as a threat to the yellow-tufted honeyeater, which are around the Chiltern Forest area. And it really is quite bizarre that a bird that we know, an invasive bird that we know from around the world, recognised by the UN, recognised by all the studies on its impact, cannot be declared in Victoria because nobody's been able to prove it is a threat to an endangered species. I mean, it's just frankly bizarre. Hopefully, once the ACT designation goes through, then the other governments in Australia will start to rethink the way they approached pest animals.
Thank you for that, Bill. And look, obviously we need to work harder about influencing people, generally the community and our politicians, to do more in regard to, you know, that classification. It's just not adequate, is it? I think Gail has adequately answered a number of questions, but one of the big problems we are sort of considering is the question of euthanasia. We note from your website that you just have a policy that could you just explain exactly how you operate that euthanasia aspect of your program?
We did research at the ANU, Australian National University, on euthanasing birds with carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. Carbon dioxide, which you get out of a cylinder, a high pressured cylinder, and carbon monoxide, which people get out of the exhaust of their cold petrol car or their car. And the research showed, and the results of this are on our website under our scientific papers. We filmed the miners being euthanized with carbon monoxide from a 1600cc Corolla, so a small engine. We wrapped the cage in Glad wrap and filmed it, and the miners were unconscious off the perch on the floor within 7 seconds and dead within 19 seconds. Now, that is extremely quick. And the thing that was really positive was that the birds were not stressed at all. They were just sitting on the perch, and all of a sudden they just fell off into the ground. Now, we then also did the same thing with carbon dioxide, which I said you get from a cylinder, a high pressure cylinder. It's quite dangerous. Anyway, it took twice to 3 times as long for them to drop off the perch, and carbon dioxide operates differently from carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide affects the nervous system, so they just drop down and die very quickly, whereas carbon dioxide actually operates to basically suffocate them. So when we were filming these birds with carbon dioxide, you can see them obviously stressed and gaping for air, because the carbon dioxide was stopping their lungs from absorbing the oxygen. So the research clearly showed that carbon monoxide with a cold petrol car is much more humane. It's stress-free, it's quick, and it's painless. Unfortunately, it took years and years and years for the RSPCA, the National Office of the RSPCA, to accept that. And the reason that they were concerned is that they were concerned that people would use the exhaust of a hot car, a car that's just been driven. And when a car has been driven, the catalytic converter, which all cars have these days, the catalytic converter renders the carbon monoxide to water vapor and CO2. So it's not nearly as effective. But so that was their hang up. And now when you use a cold petrol car, hasn't been driven, catalytic converter hasn't been activated, it takes about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes for the heat of the exhaust gas to be sufficient to activate the catalytic converter and render it then less effective. So as I said, using a cold car, the birds are on the floor and dead within 19 seconds. Now, because there's rough edges on our trap, we say to people it could be 30 seconds to 40 seconds, but that's well within the limit of the gas getting warm. So it's a very quick death and a very painless death. So carbon monoxide from a cold petrol car is, for us, the way to go. The ACT government, the ACT RSPCA office accepts that. Now, the way we do it is that our trap, the PG's trap, sorry, the PG's trap has 2 chambers. The feeding chamber, which then has an opening into this larger containment chamber. The larger containment chamber is about 600 millimetres, so 60 centimetres high by 40 by 40. And you put that in a big plastic bag like you get for the wheelie bin, some heavy duty plastic bags. We then use a grey water hose that goes from the exhaust, as I said, from a cold petrol car into the bag with the trap. We put a rag around the exhaust that doesn't leak out there. We crunch the plastic bag down as much as we can around the trap and tie it off, but don't make it airtight, because you want the air in the bag to escape as the exhaust is coming in. Run the car for a minute and a half, and bye-bye. And then we just open it out. Don't handle them, never handle a miner, because I said all these bird mites. we just empty them out in paper, wrap it up into a plastic bag and into the wheelie bin. So it's very, very quick. Everybody's got nearly everybody's got a car. It's very cheap compared to having to take it to a depot for them to use carbon dioxide. Where councils in New South Wales have set up depots, where they got council depots and they use carbon dioxide, it's fine for people who live close by. They'll just drop into the depot. But in sort of rural shires, people who are trapping aren't going to drive 10 miles in or 10 kilometres into the council depot to get them bumped off. So what happens, either people don't do it, or they do, or they just don't trap, or they or just do some other way. So that's the way we do it. It's endorsed here in the ACT. It certainly is a most humane way of disposing of them, and very, very quick.
And most of your volunteer trappers are using that method?
All of them would be.
Yeah, okay.
We used to have the RSPCA here some years ago, would accept birds, and then they would inject them one by one with a barbiturate to kill them. You can imagine how that would be if you got a trap, a dozen birds, and they're catching them one by one and injecting them in front of their mates. I mean, that to me is extremely inhumane. Anyway, they stopped doing this service because they reckon that these birds weren't pest animals because they hadn't been formally declared a pest animal by the ACT government. So anyway, so people now will euthanize them at home with car exhaust.
Someone is asking a question here on the chat about whether you can use a lawnmower in some sort of way.
Yeah, any petrol engine, just excuse me while I take my jumper off, it's a bit warm in here. It's a hard thing to say, that being warm in Canberra, but there you go. Yeah, you can use any petrol engine, not two-stroke, but four-stroke engine. So your ride-on mower, your ordinary lawn mower, a motorbike, anything like that at all. As long as it's a petrol driven, it's fine.
Okay, and someone else was asking about the risk of others seeing the activity and people becoming distressed in the community. Has that been a problem in Canberra?
Well, that's why we say that first of all, the traps should be on private property and preferably in backyards. Now, we had a case some years ago where a trapper had the approval of the principal of a primary school to trap in the courtyard of the primary school during school holidays. And in the first 3 days, they caught 30 minors in 3 days during the school holidays. It just so happened that the school was in between a retirement home and the bus stop, and somebody walked through the courtyard, the shortcut through the courtyard to get to the bus stop, and saw these trap minors, or minors in this trap, and become obviously quite distressed by it, and got in touch with the RSPCA and that sort of stuff. So it is best not to have it on display or parts where the public can see it. So even though this aged person was trespassing, walking through a school, you got can be a problem. Now, we don't get too much negative press here at all. In fact, I think there's been 2 letters to the editor in all the years we've been operating, and these were by well-known animal liberationist people who are against fishing and all sorts of dealings with animals. So it's only those views that get any sort of currency here, but very, very, very few problems at all.
We have a question also about the information campaign involving schools. And
Yep.
although we wouldn't necessarily be engaging in trapping in schools necessarily, but are there any perspectives you can offer in terms of education with young people?
I think, in fact, trapping in schools is really a significant matter for government and for education departments and for parents. As I said before, minors, their feces are heavily contaminated with pathogens and stuff like that. And in a lot of school yards, you have their little shorter shade and stuff like that. And minors find those really good spots to roost. And the kids at lunchtime, there's always scraps around schools. So schools have some of the highest density of minor populations you could come across. And because of the human health risk, because of the pathogens and the bird mites and stuff like that, it really is quite a significant health risk. So I think, in fact, what we really should be doing is concentrating on getting principals and school boards and the janitors at schools to be well across the issue of the problem of minors, and also the parents of those schools, that their child can be at risk of contamination and infection with bird mites. Now, one of the stories I like to tell is that one of our members, in his ripe old age of my age, he grew up in Melbourne. And when he was a young kid, 5, 6 years old, he had this rash over his neck and the side of his face. And parents took him to the doctors, nothing they could work out what was going on. They tried ointments and pills and all sorts of things. Anyway, his dad come into his bedroom one night to make sure, see how he was. And what he saw was a little line of bird mites coming down from the cornice of his ceiling down onto his bed, over his pillow, and infecting him. And so once they realised that it was bird mites that was causing a problem, they could get on top of it. We've also had stories just 2 years ago. An older lady from the Canberra was up in Sydney at her daughter's place, having food, eating in the barbecue area under this outdoor barbecue area, where miners had been roosting, and so there was his feces sort of dropping off out of the rafters. And she got infected just by sitting outside in this barbecue area. So it's a risk. I don't know how big it is a risk, but certainly it's enough of a risk to be able to inform schools and the parents that they need to be managing this. So in a couple of schools, we've had the janitors do this during school holidays, and that's really quite successful. So that's really quite successful. But in so it's worth thinking about that, Sally. Having a bit of a campaign with both the schools and the education departments and the teachers. Plenty of information you can give about the problems of minors and the need to deal with them.
Now, look, I'm not sure how we're going, Claire, for time, but thank you so much, Bill, for all these perspectives and for making yourself available tonight. I mean, you know, I thought they were bad, but you've made me realise they're really, really, really bad. And
well, the bad thing, Sally, is that they don't take any notice of these minor stickers. You know, sort of no minor stickers on the back of cars. So.
Yes. But look, it's great to hear that you have had some success, and it can give us some hope. And yes, the numbers I do feel are starting to explode in Myrtleford, because no doubt there's a very ready food supply, and it's a very prolific sort of environment here, so it would probably be very suitable for them. But thank you so much, and I know all the members would have really enjoyed to hear your story tonight. and to give us more encouragement to do more. So thank you kindly.
That's okay. It's my pleasure.